I'm here with Catarina Rivera, and we'll be talking about disability inclusion. So I'm looking forward to talking to Catarina. Do you want me to call you Catarina or Cat?
If you can say Catarina, that's even better. Or you can say Catarina.
Catarina. Catarina, yeah. Okay, Catarina. So I'm going to do a brief introduction for Catarina. And Catarina is a disability speaker and DEI consultant who works with corporations and organizations that are committed to accessibility and inclusion, focusing on creating an inclusive culture in today's marketplace. At the heart of hearing blindness, Latina, Catarina is dedicated to dismantling the stigma surrounding disability and shares her personal experiences in this regard. In 2022, she was named one of LinkedIn's top voices in disability advocacy. So, Katarina, welcome, and I'm very happy you're here. And I have to ask, is there some kind of background noise? I don't know if it's my hearing aid or something else. Did you hear anything?
Uh, there is some kind of construction outside. I don't know if that's part of it. Let me. What if I mute my mic when I'm not speaking? Because sometimes there's an echo that people hear of themselves. I'm not sure.
Oh, that's okay. I just wanted to make sure it wasn't my hearing is dying or something because it's very old. so so you are now in Portugal, and I bet it's very hard to be inside when you have beautiful countries that you're in now right now, right? Have you been spending a lot of time outside?
I enjoy the time difference. So, first, before I start talking, I'll give a visual description of myself. I'm Catarina. I'm a light skinned Latina woman with dark brown wavy hair. I'm wearing silver hoop earrings and a black sleeveless shirt with ruffles on the collar and down the center. And behind me is a white wall and a window. I'm very animated when I speak, smiling often. So, yes, I enjoy the time difference because most of my clients work the US time zone. So I kind of have until 3 p.m. in the afternoon to go out and enjoy, explore the neighborhood, eat some food. So today I had a networking meeting at a coffee shop with a designer, and that was very fun. So I'm trying to just make the most of it. But I am an entrepreneur and I am on the computer all the weekdays.
Yes, yes. Oh, thank you for the reminder about self-describing. I always forget because I don't really like describing myself. That's part of it. But some people I know I've talked to some blind people, and they don't really care for self-describing, but it's something that's important to you. So I'll remember that. So I'll describe myself now. I'm a light-skinned Hispanic with short, dark brown hair, and I'm wearing glasses and a black t-shirt, and there's a white wall behind me with a small art piece behind me and a door, a closed door. So how do you know when to be more or less descriptive when describing yourself?
Well, first of all, I just do want to acknowledge what you said that not every blind person is a fan of this. That's absolutely true. And I know that. So I guess my thinking and approach when it comes to descriptions is because some people do like it, I'd rather provide it. And the people that don't like it or not a fan of it don't have to utilize that information. But if you don't provide it, then the people that do benefit or do like it don't have access. So that's my approach with it. I do like to acknowledge that not every blind person likes that practice. And you were asking me how descriptive to be. In general, we want to be brief as possible, and also communicate important information. So, one thing that I always talk about is that I'm a light skinned Latina. And I share that because that communicates to the listener that I have a certain amount of privilege. So when I'm sharing my experiences, that is something they can take into consideration. They have access to the same information that someone who can see my skin color would have access to. So that's important to me to really represent accurately. But otherwise, I give a short description, and I always like to say it's kind of a little bit about my personality because I think that gives more of a human quality to it. That's just my style with intros. So I'll say that I smile often, that I talk with my hands, just to kind of add additional personal, kind of a personal window. But yeah, I think there's always a balance. You don't want to over explain like every detail on your wall.
Right, right. This is what I did. There's art piece behind me. Yeah, just keep it brief. Otherwise, you risk.
No, you were fine.
Oh, okay, okay. But so yes. So my first question, Catarina, Andrew Bennett says, I like how Catarina sounds when pronounced the Spanish way. Yeah, I prefer that too. Anybody would. Well, when I was growing up, people used to say Juanita, Juanita. Even my best friend, who was Mexican herself, she used to call me Juanita, Juanita. And I used to hate it, but I never told her anything. Uh, so now it's just they call me Juana, which is easier, I think. Juana. It's just two syllables, simple. So anyway, so how did you get started working with companies on disability awareness and inclusion?
I started with this really because I reached a point in my disability identity journey that led me to share my story publicly. When I was first diagnosed with Usher syndrome, I was 17 years old. It was the summer before I was going to college, and it was a huge deal. I was not expecting it. I already wore hearing aids, and I was very well adjusted to that. I was not expecting to have a vision disability as well. And the vision disability was progressive. So that was a lot to take in. And I went on my own journey with it. I was also a person becoming an adult and dealing with their 20s, which for many people is a challenging time to go through your 20s. So I, first of all, felt very much in denial. I was very angry as well and didn't want to talk about my disability. And I preferred to hide. After some time moving to New York City, meeting other blind people, I started to progress and become more accepting of what was going on and access more resources. And that was incredibly helpful. So I stayed in that space for a while. Then, about 5 or 6 years ago, I started using a white cane. And that really changed the way the world viewed me. It was hard to make that shift for myself, not being anonymous anymore to being someone that everybody looked at and questioned. And also because I still have some remaining central vision, I knew that I was not going to conform to the non disabled person's idea of what blindness looked like. I was going to use my cane and my phone. I was going to be on my cell phone, on the subway car. And it took me some time to show up in the world with my cane confidently, using the cane in the way that worked for me and not being concerned with the questions, opinions, thoughts of others. When I reached that point, my life changed for the better. I became more of a self advocate. The cane kind of opened up the conversation in many settings. And anytime that I really advocated for myself, I saw that my experience was better. And that really helped me. I loved having that experience. So once I reached that point and saw, wow, my life is better when I use my voice, when I advocate, I didn't want the benefits to only stop with me. And that gave me a lot of energy around sharing my story publicly. The way that I chose to do that was on Instagram. In 2020, I started an Instagram account called Blindish Latina. It was not a business, it was just a place for me to tell my stories and to talk about blindness, because I felt a lot of people were misinformed or did not understand the daily lived life, the daily lived experience of a blind person. I found that I loved these conversations that I was having. I loved the disability community that I was connecting to online, and I just wanted to get more engaged. I felt a lot of clarity around becoming a public speaker. I've started other businesses, I've had other initiatives, but when it came time to consider this one, I felt a super clear calling and message to show up in the world in this way, and I followed it. So I started my business the next year in 2021. I got very serious about my content strategies. And really, truly, that's how I grew my business. All my clients come to me from now social media and Google search. And, but I'm not out there buying advertisements or anything like that. People are coming because they've seen my work or they've read about me somewhere. So that was really, really cool to get hired by companies and continue to expand and grow. So that's how I got my start. And thankfully, it's been going very well. And I've been full time on my business for a little while now. I'm about to celebrate next month my second anniversary.
That's wonderful. I love hearing that. And in fact, your business is doing so well that you're hiring a social media manager, right?
Yes, I actually already have 3 part-time contractors and a bookkeeper and various coaches. So this will be an additional person.
Okay. That's wonderful. That's wonderful. Congratulations on your second year anniversary. I know that's pretty quick also. Sometimes it can take um, longer than 2 years, up to 5 years or so, for businesses to really gain traction, you know. So, so when you started losing your vision at 17, it was pretty hard to cope with, especially as a teenager. You want to go out, hang out with your friends, and then so it did it take you some time to adapt to this big change in your life?
Definitely took me a long time to adapt, to consider talking about it. When I went to college, I saw that a lot of my peers were drinking a lot, basically, and
Yeah.
I really had to protect myself and take care of myself. I actually became the designated driver. I did not drink at all in college because I was just very concerned about what would happen to me if I was not seeing well at a party and also further impaired. So I that was one kind of measure I took to feel more control over myself. I think a lot of blind people can relate to this feeling of wanting to have control over something. So, for example, in the community, I see that a lot of us are fitness enthusiasts and we're very fit and we're engaged in a lot of exercise. And that's kind of a positive way to feel in control of your body. And so I think we all kind of react to it in different ways. One of the best things that I have done more recently as a disabled person is connect cross disability. Learning about people with very different types of disabilities has been so healing and powerful for me. I love connecting to wheelchair users or people with chronic illnesses, mental health conditions, learning disabilities, because we really share so much. And then we also have experiences that are different. And I appreciate learning from everyone and feeling like we're all in it together.
I do too. It's been a very instead of just learning about the deaf community and the hard of hearing community, it's been important to learn about other disabilities. And it's been quite an education too for me because I'm familiar with mental health, going through mental health issues myself, but people who use wheelchairs, who have autism, a different range of disabilities, there's a lot to learn. So I think it's important to expose ourselves to people with different disabilities, and that's how we learn how to what their specific needs are when it comes to the internet, which is what I focus on now, and then as well as older adults too. So I just wanted to know, Catarina, how do you feel about losing person first language versus identity first language for people with disabilities? For people who are listening who are not familiar with these terms, person first means a person with a disability, and identity first is disabled person. And person first is meant to emphasize the whole person and not just reduce someone to their disabilities. Say, for example, a deaf person. Um, do you prefer using deaf and blind person, or is it a different way? How do you prefer?
Well, I think that, first of all, with a person first and identity first language, I prefer identity first. So I will describe myself as a disabled person, disabled woman. And for me, that's what resonates. I don't identify with disability euphemisms. For example, differently abled, handicapable. I'm not a fan of terms like that,
No.
especially because they did not originate from a disability community. They're very much about making disability sound better with this inherent understanding or assumption that they're resting upon is that, oh, disability is a bad word or a bad thing, and we need to make it more palatable. So, not a fan of those. And far as person first, identity first language, I think that I just recognize the historical implications of both, how they originated. And it was so important to emphasize personhood when our community was being institutionalized, when we did not have access to education, when parents were told there was no hope for their children's future, that there was nothing that their children would be able to contribute to the world. We were very much dehumanized. And in many parts of the world, disabled people are still dehumanized and kept at home and kept out of society or institutionalized still. So there is totally a place for person first language. And I think that every person's self identification just needs to be respected. So if I find out that someone identifies differently than me, I'm going to use their preferred language when referring to them. I'm always going to respect that. Now, you were asking me about the terms deaf or deaf blind. For me, myself, I use deaf with the lowercase d because I did not grow up culturally deaf. My parents are both hearing, and we were not exposed to ASL at all. I was pushed into that hearing world, speaking world, received tons of speech therapy, and this is not a culture that we connected with. So, and I think that it would have been great to connect to the deaf community, but it just wasn't how what was being done at the time. So I recognize, like, really respect the deaf culture. So I would only use the lowercase d. As far as deaf blind goes, I've been trying it out, and I think that I use it sometimes. Other times I'll just say I'm blind and deaf or deaf and blind. And, I think it really depends on the context. Am I trying to have someone else understand me? Do they know deaf blindness? I think that a lot of people still don't have enough awareness of what that even means. They really see the words blind and deaf as on like 100% blind or you have full vision. They don't understand the nuances, the spectrum. The same thing with deafness. Someone says they're deaf, but they're using hearing aids. People are, how can you hear? Deafness is also a spectrum. So I am using it more often, and I think that is helpful to educate others.
Yes, yes. I was just learning about the deaf blind community myself, and obviously there are various levels of hearing loss and blindness. The same goes for blindness also. So, so it's been really interesting to learn more about that. But you brought up your parents. How did your parents handle um, their blindness and deafness? Because first you became deaf. and then became blind later. How did your parents cope with that?
So my brother also has the same condition as me, so we had the same experience. So I think that was helpful in a way because my mother was able to do the same things for him that she did for me. She already knew what the resources were. I think it's very important to mention that my parents are English dominant. They spent my father has spent his whole life in the US. My mom came from Cuba as a young girl, so she was very much in
Okay.
the culture and knew how to navigate systems. So that makes a difference in how my childhood unfolded because she was able to understand IEP meetings in the school system and advocate for my needs and fight for me. So I had the benefit of not having to really advocate for myself until much later in life because my mom had it handled. And my father was, I would just say I don't know much about how it impacted him because he is more of a reserved communicator. And I don't know if other uh, Latino people listening can kind of understand that type of man. But I think that it was hard, and my mom always wanted resources and did not get a lot of them from the medical community, which is very common. So, but she was able to find them. Like later on, we got access to free hearing aids to the state of Maryland. There were a lot of services that I think she was able to navigate in the end. Um, so I think she was more in action mode and like what can we do, and then with blindness as well, it became another action mode because it's overwhelming, it's unknown. So for her, she felt better to talk to people, to look and find what was out there. We even went to Cuba to Cuba to see, they apparently said they have a cure for retinitis pigmentosa, and I'm not seeking a cure now, but this is when I was 18 years old.
Yeah.
So there was a sense of let's go and see what it is. But we ended up not pursuing anything there because it required a surgery and you had to go back to Cuba every year for 2 weeks, which seemed like a very big commitment, and we didn't fully trust what was being shared. So, all that to say is that I think there's much more to my parents' stories than I will know at this point. But I definitely think that it was hard for them and they didn't have connections necessarily to a lot of other families of disabled kids, but they did find resources and navigate systems.
That's so fascinating. That is true about how mothers tend to be more proactive, and fathers kind of let their wife take over a little bit. They just kind of hold back a little bit. But growing up, my father was the one that was really proactive because my mother was a teacher and had to be at school early. So my father took over. She took me to school. She talked to the school about my needs, what I needed. And so he was a lot more proactive because he had more of a flexible schedule. He worked full time, but his schedule was a little bit more flexible. So it's, it's the opposite for me. But that's interesting to hear that. I did find that that's very true in Latin families. The mothers are very strong. I mean, may think it's a stereotype, but it's very common. It's very common. It's very true. But so Catalina, I wanted to ask you how do you? I love how you share about this disability joy and how you're joyful with your disability, not in spite of it. I just want to know, where does this joy come from?
So I love that you're highlighting disability joy. I think it's very powerful, very affirming, and healing. And Where does my joy come from? It definitely comes from, I don't know, my spirit, my personality. I've always been more of a passionate person, and I think that having a disability made me very clear that I was not going to waste time in my life. I was going to figure out what I'm meant to do, what I'm passionate about, and that really helped me to so far make choices that I think could have been difficult for others. I trust my intuition and I let that guide my life and my decisions. I love to travel, I love adventure. I don't want to pass up adventures. So, and I hope it comes from my ancestors as well and from everything that they have done to in the name of family and stability and safety. There's a lot of history of immigration in my family looking for a better life. So I think expressing joy and trying to live in joy is a good way to honor what their hopes and dreams were for us.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I think that's so true also. When you have a country of immigrants and then you have all these colorful experiences. And you recently you were in Mexico City, right? You're traveling to Mexico City. Was that for fun or for work?
I travel all the time and I travel and I work at the same time. So Mexico City was originally going to be for work. I was attending an event, but the event got canceled. But I kept my trip. We already had it all set. So I spent a month in Mexico City with my partner. And then we came to Portugal, where we are now. And this was also for work, but we stayed longer. So I just finished co hosting a week-long trip to Lisbon for disabled travelers. So it was an accessible Portugal experience. And we had 8 travelers come. All of them were American, different types of disabilities. We had mental health conditions represented, mobility disabilities. So we had 2 people using scooters during the trip, blind, deaf-blind, chronic illness, learning disabilities, neurodiversity. It was
Wow.
so magical. And we had an experience shared together that was designed for them, doing so many different things and having adventures like adaptive surfing, which I was very scared to do, but I felt I could not live with myself if I passed it up. So on that surfboard, I did not stand, but I got on my hands and my knees, and I did ride like that one time. So, I tried it.
Wow. That sounds amazing. So, how was the whole experience in Mexico City in terms of accessibility? Did you face a lot of barriers there in Mexico City? Because I imagine, the oldest cities, Mexico City is very old, and so is Portugal. So I imagine the streets are very uneven, don't have elevators, and it's just not as accessible. But do you find that people there in those countries are learning more about accessibility because of what you're doing, and in general, they're learning more about how to make the experience more accessible for travelers?
I would hope that there is more learning happening. And I think it's really due to the work of local activists in those countries and organizations that are becoming stronger and more recognized in society. I would love to reach more of a Spanish speaking audience in the future. I just was on Telemundo for the first time. It was so cool. Just some family members randomly had their TV on Telemundo and they saw me. They're messaging, "You on Telemundo, amazing." So I love that now the message that I share about creating a more inclusive world was shared with that audience. But in Mexico City, it was difficult for exactly the reasons that you stated. The sidewalks were broken in many places. There were holes in the sidewalk, a lot of variation. a lot of driveways, so ups and downs, and just challenges. Not curb cuts on every corner, and sometimes curb cuts were done in a way that created a very steep kind of wall on the curb cut, so that can be challenging as well for people. And not every intersection had a light indicating when to cross. All these kinds of things made it a little bit stressful to navigate. And sometimes I was up for it. Sometimes I felt like I had less energy for it. But I got to know the neighborhood that I was staying in. I walked with my partner sometimes, but I made an intentional effort to also go out on my own. And that's something that I do everywhere because I refuse to let the inaccessible world keep me inside. So when I have energy, I push myself and I go and I do things independently. It's very important to me to maintain my independence. So I do want to say that the Mexican people were lovely and I felt that you know, they wanted to help me, and I think that's great. That sometimes I did want help. Obviously, sometimes I don't want help, so it can be kind of tricky knowing that you're going to get a lot of attention when you're out.
Yeah.
But I appreciate the intention.
Yeah. Yeah, this brings up another question. But first, I want to say hi to some people here in the audience. Maria Rouse says, "Good morning to Andrew Bennett. Planned the Texas trip." That must be some kind of inside joke. I'm not sure. And Chloe Cadell says that trip. "This is what I hope my boys would do when they are older. How incredible." I'm guessing she's talking about Mexico and Portugal. And Maria Rao says accessibility is very important, especially to resources available that people don't know. That's true, Maria. A lot of people don't know that there's resources available that you can pick up from the internet. So much information about accessibility, really very easy to find. And there are some companies that you may want to avoid, but that's another topic. Robert Bailey says hello. Hi, Robert. Thank you for being here. So, Katarina, so you've been the issue of being someone who has a disability and being out and being independent. You did have a partner with you, which always helps. Anywhere you travel, a lot of people travel alone without who don't have disabilities, but I always prefer to travel with someone. Although I did go to London alone, and that was hard because people have accents in London, so that's really tough. Um, but this brings up a question. When I was in my first year of college, I took a self-defense course for deaf people, deaf women particularly, and that was really interesting. Do you ever emphasize the need for self-defense, knowing some form of self-defense when you're traveling?
I think that I try to employ common sense, and living in New York City for 13 years has
Mhm. Yeah.
given me. So one thing that I do is I always wear a fanny pack, and I put my fanny pack across the front of my body, and that makes me
Mhm.
feel like I know where my valuables are. Nobody is going to be able to access them without me seeing them. And when I eat, I also keep it very close to me. So those are two things that I do. Otherwise, I'm always looking for well-lit areas. I do not like to walk in dark areas due to my disability already, but it's also good for safety. And I rely on local knowledge as well as where are the areas that you would recommend that we're out at night, or are there any areas that you would not recommend? So I think that's important to ask for local knowledge. And I feel uncertain about something, I really empower myself to get a cab or take a car if I feel that that would make me feel more comfortable. So I look for things like that. But I think every disabled person knows their own limits. And, as you grow in life, you pick up kind of your safety strategies. But I do also take a smoke alarm and a carbon monoxide alarm with me when I travel, because most of the Airbnbs or even hotels, they might not have a carbon monoxide alarm. So that's something that I highly recommend for everyone to bring on their own, so that you know that that's present. So I think that those are just some strategies, but definitely I think as a woman, you're always concerned, or you always know that you could be vulnerable, and that's really unfortunate. It shouldn't be that way.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I agree. That's an interesting point about the carbon monoxide alarm. I That has never occurred to me. Or smoke alarm also. That's something to think about. I keep that in mind for in the future when I travel. Um, so just going off topic a little bit, away from accessibility, in 2016 you started a food justice nonprofit as a way to make healthy food more accessible to communities in need. What spurred you to start this nonprofit?
So this organization is called the Washington Heights Inwood Food Council, and it was actually part of my previous full-time role. So the last full-time job that I had was at a food bank in New York City, and I was hired as a community engagement manager for the communities of Washington Heights and Inwood, where I lived for a very long time. The whole time that I was in New York City, I lived in this area. I was already focused on public health with my career, and I went deeper than that into food justice and food sovereignty and really learning about these. So when the opportunity came with this role, we were asked to, all the community engagement managers, we were in different areas of the city, we had to do some kind of community action group. And I did not want to start a group that was temporary or that relied on me. I really had a clear vision to start an organization that I could eventually grow to be led by community members, to exist without me. And that is what we did. It took about 4 years for the group to get to that point where we became our own organization with our own fiscal sponsor. We had a steering committee in the beginning of community members, and that continued. So we always had committee involvement, then we added positions for each person, and all the decisions were made with all of us together. It was focused on consensus and making those decisions together. The group focuses on building food justice in the community. They have been running without me since the fall of 2020. And I love when they come up on my Instagram and I see what they've got going on, or I get their newsletter. They're forming new partnerships, they're doing food distributions, they're partnering up on nutrition classes and just different cool things. And so it's all about helping the community. So that's what spurred me to start it. I also wanted to leave a legacy in my community because I knew that I was not going to live there forever. So when that organization became independent and really sustainable, we hired someone to replace me, then I felt I was ready for my next chapter.
I love that. I love hearing about stories like that. I mean, we hear there's so much food inequality in our country. I know you have people living out in food deserts and they just don't have access to healthy food. So here in New Mexico, we have a lot of food banks, but we do have to transport food to food deserts. There's a lot of small towns here in New Mexico where people are very isolated, poor, they just don't have the access. So to have a food nonprofit like this is wonderful for the community, for people who really need it. And I'm guessing the nonprofit is doing really well now.
I hope so. They have continued their work and they're continuing to add new committee members. I know they continue to do their gardening. So I think they're doing well. And just like any organization, they might have ups and downs, but we know that
Yeah,
that happens. So I'm very proud of them and I'm very excited for the future of what they can bring to the community. That
yeah,
very important.
yeah, that sounds wonderful. So, Catarina, we are coming to the end of our chat. So, what do you want people to take away from our conversation today?
So I think that what I would like everyone to take away from this conversation is that we can all make a difference when it comes to creating a more inclusive and accessible world. As a public speaker and consultant, I focus a lot on workplace disability inclusion and now inclusive and accessible travel. But the workplace is made up of people. And if that becomes something that you are committed to or you're already committed to, I encourage you to look for opportunities to create even small changes, whether that's within your family, your faith institution, your community, a school. We need inclusion in all these spaces, and we're truly not there yet. So keep asking about it and keep talking about it with your friends and family. The inclusion work is something that we just all need to be a part of.
Right, I think that's wonderful. And it just reminded me, we just had Easter. So I had to go to confession. So I'm Catholic. I go to confession. I hadn't gone in a couple of years. And so I went to confession. Know how when going to the confessional, the door is closed, and I need to be face to face with the priest, and he would not open the door for me when I wanted confession. I said, I'm deaf. I need to sit with you. And he said, no. He very firmly said, no, I'm not going to open the door. And I said, why? I have a respiratory infection. Why are you giving confession anyway if you're sick? You can really put people, make people very sick. That's highly contagious. I know the confessional screen is porous, it's not like solid block of wood. So I was so upset after that. But that's just an example of inaccessibility. And he said, well, you can make an appointment. And I said, I tried doing that. They told me to come into confession in person. So that's just another example of inaccessibility and how, our church needs to be more aware of accessibility and their what do you call them, patrons who have disabilities also. They make appointments and stuff, but we should also have the freedom to go in and have confession and open the door if somebody wants to sit face to face with you. And you shouldn't be given confession if you're sick, because people have weakened immune system, right? So that to me was, and you know what? It wasn't the first time it happened. It was the second time that happened. Not that. I'm not going to this church anymore, so I've switched over to a different church. So that was a pretty bad experience, but it's just one of many examples that we run into all the time. So
Yes, thank you for sharing that. I had not thought about the confessional in a very long time, and that makes so much sense that it is inherently inaccessible the way that structure is designed. And I know that we believe that churches are exempt from the ADA as far as I understand. No, they're not. Okay, well, good. I'm glad they're not, because so many people have said that it's been challenging to access their communities. So good on you for switching to another community. I hope it goes better. And yeah, that's just one example of an organization where you wanted to be included, and we have disabled people that want to be included everywhere. We want to take dance classes, we want to do sports, we want to go on vacation, we want to be included in
Right.
society, and not be told that we have to leave or adapt constantly to a world that's not adapting to us.
I know it's funny because I asked the person behind me, a woman, to come in behind me and like help me have a conversation with the priest, right, in the confessional. And then I got angry with him and I said, well, if you're sick, you shouldn't be giving confession. And the woman said, you shouldn't talk to him like that. And I said, you know what? You go ahead and have confession with him. I'm going to leave now because I knew I was going to say something not very nice, so I just left. But it's the whole putting priests on a pedestal, they are not exempt from doing the things they're supposed to do. So I'm not involved in accessibility. It's supposed to help all of you patrons, not just the ones you feel like servicing. So yes, it's just and the other church provides ASL interpretation. So already which is really great, really great. So I'm happy about that. I'm looking forward to going to that church. I went to this one because it was closer, like 2 minutes from my house. So anyway, um, I really enjoyed our chat this morning, Catarina, and I'm really glad you could join me. And I want to thank everybody who joined us this morning. Please join me next week. And I have a surprise guest. She's not really a surprise guest, but um, someone who is deaf and blind will be joining me next week. His name is Matthew. And I have to learn how to pronounce his last name because I don't know. So I'll have to ask him how to pronounce it. But anyway, join me next week. And in the meantime, have a great week, everyone. And I will see you next week. Bye.